Let's set the market in free agency with PFF's expert on contract predictions, Brad Spielberger.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, Bengals fans, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. I'm your host, Jake Liscow, along with your host, James Rapien, joined today by Brad Spielberger from PFF, who nails contract predictions every year. We're going to get into some of those contract predictions and get into what the market's going to look like in a few positions of need for the Cincinnati Bengals. Brad, you were at the Indianapolis Scouting Combine, the NFL Combine in Indianapolis last week, of course, and before we dive into any specific positions or scarcity or what you're hearing about different markets, this and that, what was the biggest surprise for you at the Combine, and why was it how quiet it was?
It was super quiet, which was interesting. I think maybe you and I talked about that on Twitter. I just found it weird and notable that Jeremy Fowler put that in his article. Obviously, he talks to infinitely more people than I do, but it was a little bit quiet. I think maybe teams and agents are trying to, make free agency more exciting, more interesting, less obvious tampering. I guess technically they're not supposed to be doing any of that. But the biggest surprise to me was the confidence across the NFL that J.J. McCarthy is going to be a top, 5 draft pick. And I heard that that one is firsthand. I heard that personally from 2 different personnel people in the league, neither of which I think are in the quarterback market or interested in that really at all. There's just a lot of fans of his across the league, and clearly some teams think there are some huge fans of his, in that top 10.
Wow. I mean, that's big for the Bengals because obviously they want 17 quarterbacks to go off the board before they pick 18th. So the more the merrier. And if 4 are gone, potentially, at least 3 are gone in the top 5, and it's not one of the big 3 that people look at, then at least 4 will probably be gone before 18. Wow. I wasn't ready for that, but sign me up, Brad. Maybe you have more good news throughout this interview here. I think the Bengals' biggest need is defensive tackle. And we've talked a ton this offseason about right tackle, of course, about defensive tackle. How would you assess? We obviously know Chris Jones is at the top of it. Everyone assumes he's going back to Kansas City, but how would you assess this free agent defensive tackle class? I assume there's going to be a lot of money thrown around.
Definitely. And it is a very good group. So it is good news, that Cincy, and I would agree. I think that is probably their biggest need right now. Christian Wilkins not getting a tag. Now, I know people might say the Bengals aren't going to spend, I have it at 4 years, $100 million. Maybe they're not in that market, but just good. There's another player that can fill a need elsewhere and just creates more optionality. So, yeah, I think Chris Jones does go back to Kansas City. I think Leonard Williams does go back to Seattle after getting traded for a second-round pick. But there's still a lot of good players. And there are also, do you want like a 3-tech pass rusher? Do you want more of a 0-1 tech early down guy that has some juice, pushing the pocket, stuff like that? You can get both.
Yes.
The answer is yes to all the above. So you can get both, right? So it's a good time to need that position.
Talk about DJ Reader for me a little bit, where he, if healthy, is coming off a dominant stretch of play, but is coming up on that age 30 season. And also he's not healthy. How do you see that going? I see you've got him predicted right now. You've got him projected at 3 years, 15.25 per year with $30 million in guarantees, which will be a solid contract for DJ. But is that kind of splitting the difference between where you think he might be if he were healthy and coming off a stretch of healthy play for a couple of seasons? Or how do you land on that number?
This is actually like a fully healthy or close to fully healthy projection. So I would say it's probably a little bit bullish, honestly. I'd heard some good news, and it wasn't from his camp. I just heard that there is early positive outlook on him being ready for, if not week 1, like very, very early in the 2024 season and maybe week 1. So I approached it, and it's tough still if you're not healthy right now to sign a huge deal, but we've seen the market spike at that position. This one, mirrors like a Dalvin Tomlinson deal last year that we saw in Cleveland. That's, that similar market. These 0-1 tech guys that can kick out and play 3-tech and can rush the passer a little bit. Like you said, he's been awesome when healthy in Cincinnati, been a true, game wrecker at times. So, yeah, that's basically a fully healthy projection for him right there. So maybe that is on the high side.
Did you hear anything combine wise about how the rest of the league views him? Because I think that's the interesting element here. The Bengals don't necessarily like to pay free agents that are going to be 30. And yet I look at the defensive tackles, and a lot of these free agents are around that 30-year-old range, including DJ Reader.
Yeah, so the guys closer to the ball tend to age better, and just there's less of a steep drop off when you hit that. 30 is kind of like that number that but like for a corner or a receiver, like 30 is a death knell, right? For a lineman on both sides of the ball, we've seen a lot, and it doesn't mean it applies to everyone, but we've seen a lot of players play very well into their early and even mid 30s. So yeah, I think he's probably got a lot of fans around the NFL. The only thing I did hear was I think Cincinnati does want him back, and I think he is a priority for them this offseason. They know they need to keep, the pieces they have there, maybe even add some more depth behind them as well. But yeah, I mean, when healthy, we talked about it, he's been a huge, huge piece of this defense.
The on-off splits for DJ Reader off discussed and apparent when you watch the way the defense plays when DJ Reader is on or off the field. But say they can't get it done with DJ Reader for some reason or another. Maybe they're looking at short-term solutions because of the injury, because of the age. And even though defensive linemen and offensive linemen, as you mentioned, can play well into their 30s, I often say on this podcast, you're stumbling toward a cliff in fog where you can't see your feet when you're in your 30s on the defensive line. You just don't know where the end is coming at that position. And the Bengals seem to subscribe to that philosophy in free agency for the most part, except for the occasional desperation one-year deals. Riley Reef coming to mind there. But if it's not DJ Reader, like we discussed, Sheldon Rankin's also about to turn 30. Grover Stewart, 30. Fletcher Cox in his 30s. Daquan Jones in his 30s. Maurice Hurst, 29. Quentin Jefferson in his 30s. Where would you go next? Where is the next tier? If the Bengals are looking for a 3 or 4 year deal, like there's Tier Tart. But when you look for the Bengals free agency profile, which is contract will end when the player is 31 or younger, some productivity, not a top of market guy typically, doesn't need the second year guarantees. So cross off all the David Mulligetta clients who are looking for second year guarantees. What does that market look like at defensive tackle?
Well, I was going to name a player, but I'm pretty sure he is a David Mulligetta client. And that's Raekwon Davis of the Miami Dolphins, who, former second round pick. He's super tall, about 6'7", and you do see that sometimes in his tape, like a delayed get off, or he plays upright, and guys can get underneath him. But you also do see him on some snaps, like, oh, this is why this guy was a second round pick. Like, he can drive offensive linemen backwards. I think he does a good job too of, like, if he doesn't win his pass rush, he stands there, locks up with the offensive lineman and just read and reacts to the quarterback, and had a lot of kind of late pressures or even, a couple late sacks this past year where, guys are just chasing the quarterback up into the middle of the pocket and he's there to make a play. So, good football player, big, physical, not living up to his draft status, but he's a younger version. But yeah, I'm pretty sure off the top of my head, I think he is a David Mulligetta client.
And maybe that tier of player, which is different than the Jesse Bateses and T. Higginses, maybe this could be the bridge to them working something out with a David Mulligetta client. So we don't have to continue to talk about that and him not being able to, or them not being able to get a deal done with any of his clients. He mentioned Tier Tart, Jake did, and it's someone that we talked about during the season. The Bengals put in a waiver claim for him. He went to Houston because they had higher priority. It was a really weird season in Tennessee, and then he ends up in Houston. Is his market pretty unique? Have you seen it before? Because he is only 27 years old and has been productive.
Yeah, so he's one where we talked about it, I'm about to make some edits. His is going to come down, not based on anything I heard necessarily. I'm super high on him. I think he's a stud. And when you watch his film, he's a really, really talented player. But yeah, I mean, he effectively forced his way out of Tennessee. It sounds like he wanted an extension, and I get it. Players, feel that way, and they have every right to. Plays on the RFA tender, doesn't get a deal done, and kind of makes himself get cut by Tennessee. Mike Vrabel made a bunch of comments kind of throughout the year about him not giving full effort in practice. I think was one of the comments. I don't know. So he is probably the most intriguing piece to me, though. And maybe you get a scenario where, your old pal Brian Callahan, you can call him up and say, what are people in the building that know Tyre telling you? Like, what are the reports? Is he not a bad guy, but just got frustrated? It didn't work out. Like, what are you thinking there? And the waiver claim does matter. We see it all the time. So where a team circles back after putting in a claim and not getting a guy. So it's not a unique profile. I mean, guys get frustrated and all that all the time, or they have some, I'm not saying I know this, but some character issues or whatever. he also went undrafted, maybe for a reason. But yeah, I mean, the talent is pretty undeniable. And, I think that the projection there is right now 327. That's going to come down a good bit.
Yeah, and that would be something I think in the Bengals range from an age and price perspective. Let's stay in the trenches. Maybe we'll touch on T. Higgins really quick with Brad and the quiet market or quiet whispers, perhaps non-existent whispers in Indy for T. Higgins coming up next.
Today's show is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, LED headlights, exhaust kits, and so much more. Whether you're into speed, power, style, eBay Motors has it. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, your parts are guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need and the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers.
This episode is sponsored by Game Time. Game Time knows that you shouldn't have to worry when you're buying tickets, whether it's the Reds in spring training or FC Cincinnati now in season on the West Side. Game Time is a fast and easy way to buy tickets for sporting events, for music, comedy, and theater events near you with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their best price guarantee. There's no guesswork when you buy tickets with Game Time. I love to see the view from my seat before I buy. That's one of my favorite features when I buy tickets with Game Time. And that means you know what to expect when you arrive. It's quick, it's easy. You can buy tickets in as few as 2 taps, and there will be tickets right up to the start of the event. If you're looking to be spontaneous, if you're looking to go even a little bit late, it's the best place to find those last minute deals. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKDOWN. You'll get $20 off your first purchase of tickets. Terms apply. Again, create an account. All you have to do is use code LOCKDOWN, LOCKEDON, for $20 off your purchase. Download Game Time today for last minute tickets. Lowest price guaranteed. Brad, before we flip over to the offensive side of the trenches, where the Bengals are certainly in the market for a right tackle, I want to quickly hit on T. Higgins. And, James has mentioned it. We've talked about it. The Bengals messaging a little bit different from last year, but it sounds like there wasn't a whole lot of chatter in Indy about a potential trade there. Is that a product of the draft class? Is that your experience as well? Is there just an expectation that people know what the Bengals are as trade partners, or what do you attribute that to?
Yeah, I think the last thing you said there is probably it. We know the tag came super early, which I think was notable. I think it was a signal of, extension talks are either not happening very strongly or we don't expect them to go particularly well. And then, some people thought, oh, it's because they want to then be able to negotiate a trade in Indy. Maybe. I just, that's not, like you said, really how Cincinnati operates. I think they're a team that's just comfortable with tag a player, plays out the year, and then we let them walk in free agency. The Bengals, I think, are second all-time in compensatory picks earned since the advent of the compensatory pick thing in 1994. Like that's how they operate. And technically, the comp pick was created basically for the Cincinnati Bengals or similar organizations. But anyway, I think that's the most likely scenario. He just plays out on the tag. They hope they have a healthier year across the entire roster, get some positive variance back on defense. And then they say, all right, we're going to go forward with Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, and, whatever else we can get in the draft or anything going forward.
Given that they know the amount of what the tag would be next year, roughly $26 million, let's say he went out there and had 1,300 yards and 12 touchdowns, which I don't think is insane to think from a ceiling standpoint. Do you think that's appealing at all to the team side? Or do you think that they would just let him walk because the wide receiver market is obviously booming?
Yeah, I wouldn't be shocked if they tag him again and then try to go back to the market again. And the interesting thing is, I think the time to strike was probably last offseason, if at all, because you're now going to get, Justin Jefferson, I would guess $32-33 million a year. I think CD gets 30. And I'll quick pause. Like, I know Tyreek Hill's listed at 30. It's not. It's $25 million a year. So maybe he plays the last year for 45 mil, but I don't expect it per se. So, yes. So it's interesting, right? Where the market's only getting stronger and only getting higher and higher and higher. And so, yeah, like a $26 million tag might actually look not that crazy next year, especially if, like you're saying, he has a ceiling level outcome on the range of outcomes there. So, I wouldn't put it past him.
Are we in a wide receiver bubble? Is this wide receiver bubble going to persist, or do you think it's like primed to burst?
I think the burst is already happening and will continue to happen with the secondary, like the second tier guys, right? Like the top of the market guys are going to continue to get a ton of money. But if you're in that next tier, which I think Cincinnati might view T and T does not, and I think that's why we're here. But I also think it applies to Michael Pittman too. And I think him and Indy are in a similar situation where, again, he's trying to get tier 1 money. And I think they view him as maybe not tier 2, but tier 1B, whatever. That group is now feeling the pain. They're getting pinched, right? And teams are saying, all right, we'll spend crazy top of market money for a clear-cut top 15 guy at the position, whatever. The way we're going to counterbalance that is not spending on the guys below that threshold and either going cheap in free agency or drafting. And obviously this year is viewed as like maybe the greatest draft class of all time at the position. So yes, that is where the bubble is kind of getting burst. It's become very, very tough for the guys that are just below that top threshold. Like it's not a gradual market. There's these clear kind of plateaus and drops. And I think, like I said, the disagreement between T and Cincinnati of which tier he falls into might be why we are where we are.
Sort of risky then for that tier. And I think it would be tough to have the self-awareness to be in that tier and know you're in that tier versus what some of these top guys are getting. But if you don't get an extension and then it bursts a little more and you're looking around and there's all these youngsters that could be getting paid too. Right? I mean,
yeah, I would say for sure. I mean, there's always risk of not taking a contract, no question about it. But they'd probably say, all right, well, a different team, that's more desperate, doesn't have receiver talent, would be willing to pay, a premium and just make sure they have a bona fide, legit, number one option in an offense. Even if someone were like, okay, well, he's the 20th number one, whatever. That team has nobody. Obviously, Cincinnati does not fall into that bucket. So I think that's the gamble there. And I'm sure they would love a tag and trade and go somewhere else, get extended by somebody else. And I'll say this, look, it seems more possible, I suppose, just because of how quick they were with it, how early that came out. Obviously, we haven't heard anything from T. Higgins or his camp, but maybe they, demand a trade or request a trade at some point in the offseason. Who knows? And maybe Cincinnati decides, all right, let's get some extra draft capital now as opposed to, going the comp pick route. But yeah, so anyway, long answer short, there is risk, but I think at that spot and with T's skill set too, like, there aren't a lot of 6'4", like downfield vertical threat type players. If you're like I don't know, let's say you're like a Marquise Brown type and you're clearly very good, but you're maybe not great. Like that, I think is where there's a lot of risk where, I don't know what he's been offered, but if he got offered like 17, 18 and didn't like it and thought he should have got 21, 22, get injured and not play great a couple of years, you're signing, you're Juju Smith-Schuster effectively.
Mm-hmm. It is an interesting market at wide receiver. We'll say that. The Bengals clearly have two highly invested guys that they like a lot. Let's pivot off that topic and get back to the trenches here. Let's talk about that tackle market where it's generally never a good year to need a tackle. Generally, the tackles that get to free agency are not necessarily the most desirable tackles. Usually there's some sort of flaw, let's say, but one guy that could fit if the Bengals wanted to spend there is Mike Nwenu. Does the league see him as a tackle though, Brad?
I don't really think so. I think he's viewed as a guard. I mean, we love him at all the spots and obviously grades out super well at tackle and guard, but I don't really think so. I think he is viewed as a, gap scheme mauler on the inside. I think he's about 6'3". I think his arms are a little bit shorter as well. So, it obviously depends team to team, but if I had to guess, you pulled all 32, I think you'd get more answers guard than tackle.
And so if that's the case, and knowing that at least we expect Jonah to sign elsewhere, Jonah Williams, how would you rate the depth of this right tackle class and right tackle candidates? Because it doesn't seem like there are a lot of options for the Bengals to get a starting level tackle. Sorry,
didn't mean to cut you off there. Yeah, so I agree. Look, I think if we remove quarterback, I think genuinely my statement would be like, if a good tackle is in free agency, like it's probably a red flag. And again, I'm not saying like they're bad people, but just like there's a reason why they're there, and it's probably not a good thing. So I actually like some of the starting caliber, but like not gonna blow your socks off, not much upside guys. But Trent Brown, the other guy in New England, who was viewed as a tackle by them and everyone else. Look, he's going to miss some time most years, but he's very, very talented, can play both sides of the line. Phenomenal pass protector, not great in the run game, but capable enough. And then I like Jermaine Illuminor a lot. And he was kind of this like swing tackle / journeyman for the first couple years of his career. I think the last 2 years in Las Vegas has been really, really good. Again, a better pass protector, good against kind of bull rusher, speed to power guys, can lose to the bendier type players, and is not a great guy at the second level in the run game. But if you want just a reliable, don't get Joe Burrow killed right tackle, like those two guys to me are intriguing.
I think that is an important goal for the Bengals this year, coming off the wrist injury. And, you're probably looking at a bridge guy at tackle if you're the Bengals. You're looking for a floor. You're looking for a pass protector first, I'd imagine. Ideally, you're looking to get more athletic, but it's very hard to do that through free agency, and that's usually what the draft is for. And that could be the way the Bengals are going. Let's wrap up with some discussion about some markets that are a little bit more flush. We started with the thin ones, but safety, running back, there's potentially a little bit more to talk about there if the Bengals are interested in dabbling in those waters. We'll go there to finish the show coming up next.
Today's show is brought to you by Robinhood. Did you know that even if you have a 401k for retirement, you can still have an IRA? Robinhood has the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this, now through April 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every single dollar you transfer in from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That's right, no cap on the 3% match. Robinhood Gold gets you the most for your retirement thanks to their IRA with a 3% match. This offer is good through April 30th. Get started at Robinhood.com/boost. Robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees apply. And now for some legal info. Investing involves risk, including loss. Limitations apply to IRAs and 401ks. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold for 1 year from the date of the first 3% match. Must keep Robinhood IRA for 5 years. The 3% matching on transfers is subject to specific terms and conditions. Robinhood IRA available to U.S. customers in good standing. Robinhood Financial LLC member SIPC is a registered broker-dealer. Let's stick with the trenches real quick, Brad. I just want to run by two names by you, and we know your contract projections at PFF, but Mekhi Becton has been talked about a ton. His ties to Frank Pollock with the Jets. They drafted him 11th overall in 2020, and Pollock was there. 1 year type deal. How much would he cost? Do you think that there will be a market for him? Because he was, once upon a time, he was the guy that was dominating at the combine and wowing the same way Amarius Mims did over the weekend or any of these offensive linemen.
Yeah, I am just a 1 year flyer for $5 million. I do think that his market is going to be, look, I'm talented. Like you said, he a physical specimen in some ways. And I just want to play a full season where I'm healthy. I'm sure he'd love to play left tackle, but I think he'd be willing to play right tackle in the right situation. Obviously has done it. I think it's a 1 year flyer. Maybe some team goes above that or adds incentives for snaps played or something like that. But I don't think it's going to be a very strong market. There's just too many question marks about his availability.
And then Tyron Smith is obviously someone that has been dominant at left tackle, wants to join a contender. I'm sure there will be plenty of contenders trying to get him to be their left tackle. Could the Bengals woo him with a 2 year deal instead of a 1 year deal? Like, is that how they would be able to potentially get him to play right tackle if he was open to it because of his injury history? You think that's the route to go? Because I do think there's probably a ceiling to the amount of money teams would be willing to give him.
Yeah, I suppose maybe. Yeah, no, the injury history is scary, and obviously the Cowboys, negotiated down to a very small kind of 1 year deal last year, and of course he was great. And I think he'll have a pretty decent market. I just don't see him playing right tackle. I really don't, because I think with the injury stuff as well, being like I'm gonna be more inclined to get hurt if I'm doing different things and doing things that I'm not used to. And we know Orlando Brown is not trying to kick back over.
That's true.
Breaking my heart,
though.
I know,
it's a dream to get some talent, some athleticism in there, even though he's a little bit older. But it will probably be one of those dreams that stays a dream, unfortunately, for Jaden Smith.
It's crazy because he's like 6 months older than me, and he's like an old man by offensive line standards. Anyways, go ahead.
NFL standards are different. They
no
make us feel old all the time. We just talked about yesterday how Dre Kirkpatrick's son is out there for Alabama right now. And if you need to feel old, that did it for me. Let's talk about these safeties a little bit. The Bengals could be in the safety market. There's some uncertainty around Dax Hill, some non-committal language from Bengals coaches, so from the Bengals front office. They need to find one thing that Dax Hill is good at, is the refrain this offseason. And if they decide that thing isn't safety, you could see the Bengals looking at the safety free agent group and saying, you know what? There's like 18 starting caliber safeties there. Maybe we can get a deal. Maybe it's a buyer's market. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, no, I think so. It's always kind of a buyer's market at safety. Frankly, it's become this impossible position for guys to do well. Like Jesse Bates is an outlier in terms of how he did last year, and of course had a phenomenal season in Atlanta. But there's just always too many guys available. I do think this year helps where this draft class looks very poor at the position, so maybe that helps a little bit. But yeah, there's just always like teams sit there and say, we could sign a guy top of market, or we could just take a guy that can give us 80% of that production for 30% of the price. And it just always seems to kind of kill those guys. So, I think Antoine Winfield obviously got tagged. I think he's going to get a monster deal. I know Duggar got the transition tag, which is interesting. But outside of those two, Xavier McKinney and Cam Curl, I don't think any other guy gets 10 million plus.
Yeah. So buyer's market. Hopefully the Bengals can find value there safety wise. I would be shocked if they didn't sign a free safety to bring some stability there. It just feels like that's their goal, regardless of Dax Hill. One hot topic for us has been Joe Mixon, his future. There's a ton of, I don't even want to say debate anymore about what happens with him and his potential 6.1 million savings that they could save if they did move on from him. But running back wise, it seems really deep. There's a lot of big names at the top. Is this as deep as you can remember from a running back free agent standpoint? Because there are a ton of big names.
No doubt about it. Yeah, it really is both top at the top and just the amount of depth at the position for sure. Yeah, the Mixon thing, he's worth whatever. Like, the cash he's out next year is not an issue for Cincinnati. I know he's not maybe the same explosive and guy he was on his rookie deal, but we're getting a little bit kind of crazy in my opinion at that position. So anyway, yes, I mean, I think Saquon and Josh Jacobs will get in that 10 million range, 10 million plus. I think Henry will get like kind of close, but not quite there. Maybe some incentives. And then there's like 10 dudes that I think you sign for 4 to 7 million per year that I think are all like capable 200 carry. Some guys can catch the football, some guys cannot. But yeah, it's a loaded free agent class.
And an opportunity to get more explosive. Are those kind of guys out there if they do want to save a little bit of money at the position? Who would you highlight?
Yeah, I mean, like, I think of Tony Pollard, obviously, didn't have the greatest year last year in a workhorse type role, but has that explosiveness, that big play ability we saw both as a pass catcher and a runner. I'm trying to think who can like break off big gainers. Like, I guess not a ton of these guys. I think a lot of them are more kind of like early down, 5 yard in a cloud of dust type dudes. But still, DeAndre Swift is capable of breaking off some big plays here and there as well. Then there's kind of like some injury guys like, if a J.K. Dobbins is healthy, he can be an explosive player. But there's also a lot of like your Gus Edwards, A.J. Dillon, Zach Moss, Deontay Foreman, like good players, no question about it. But not like top end speed, breakaway type backs.
Perhaps a good contrast for Chase Brown there with his explosion. Yeah. Sorry, James.
No, you're good. The Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, Clyde Edwards-Helaire connection has been talked about a ton. Is he, because of the first round pedigree, higher than just 1 year, $1 million type salary if they wanted to bring him in?
He'll get more than the minimum, but not by much. And also, I'm now realizing he's not even on my free agent board, which he should be on there. So after the show, I'm going to go add him onto the list. Look, he's going to be like in the 200s, but with all due respect. But anyway, yeah, I mean, I think that the pedigree does matter because I think the big thing there too, the signal that we don't appreciate is like probably also means he's a great dude. Like, you don't go in the first round. I mean, again, some guys will take a risk because the guy's a freak player and all that. But I think all that stuff matters. Actually, I don't hate that idea just to keep Joe happy.
We've been.
I would do it. I mean,
for years, like just waiting for that foot to drop. Last thing before we get out of here, Brad, tight ends. Haven't talked about that market. We know the Bengals are looking for something there, whether it's a 1 year Hayden Hurst reunion plus the return of Drew Sample and some depth guys and tight end by committee approach again, or if they perhaps do dabble in something a little bit longer term with Dalton Schultz leaving the market, how does that affect the rest of the tight ends hitting free agency?
Yeah, to me, like the only like young upside guy left is Noah Fant. I think the rest of the guys, you know who they are. They're number 2 tight ends. Some of them are good blockers. Some of them are good, move tight ends that can catch the ball. It's just it's not a great class at the free agent in free agency or the draft. So that's gonna be interesting. But yeah, I mean, like there's some solid veterans. Like Hunter Henry was a reliable, important piece of the Patriots offense last year. I've always liked Gerald Everett. I think he runs angry, and I think Justin Herbert has always liked throwing him the ball. You look at like third down and red zone. He's like one of the most targeted guys at tight end the last couple of years. Forces a lot of missed tackles. So yeah, there's some pieces there, but there's nothing. Not that there has been in the last couple of years in free agency, but no one that's like, all right, this is a 3-4 year deal. He's going to be kind of a foundational cornerstone of the offense. It's just not there.
You have Fant at $8 million per. Do you think because Schultz is signed and just the scarcity at the position that maybe he gets a little bit more? Do you think that 3 for 24 is still pretty close?
Yeah, maybe to a degree. I had it a bit higher. Initially had it at 3 years, 27. So not $9 million a year. And I might just bump it back up to that. So I don't think it's gonna be crazy, but yeah, because of the scarcity in both free agency and the draft. Anyway, I don't see him getting 10, but you never know.
It's just an upside issue. But last year, the tight end market was weird. You have guys like Dalton Schultz taking 1-year cheap prove-it deals, and then Hayden Hurst going to Carolina with $5.25 million guaranteed this year, which is going to make him a very cheap signing for anybody who is interested in seeing if he has anything left in the tank this year. There's also all those former Seattle tight ends, Noah Fant's teammates, Colby Parkinson and now Will Dissly, on the market if you're looking to bring guys from my neck of the woods in the Pacific Northwest back to the Midwest where I grew up, which, there's something poetic about that for me and only me. Nobody else listening finds that interesting. So maybe we should wrap the show there, Brad. Appreciate the time, the insight on this year's free agency class, getting into a few positions the Bengals are going to look at. Of course, you can find him on Twitter at PFF_Brad. We've been citing his free agency rankings and projections, his contract projections at pff.com/NFL/free agency for weeks now, if not months. We use his projections in our free agency, our own personal free agency tier list every year as well. So Brad, we appreciate all the work you do with the contract projections very much, and the time you give us at this time of year where you seem to know more than most people about how these things are going to develop.
I appreciate it. Thank you guys for having me on as always.
That's going to do it for this episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. We're back with a couple more free agency episodes before the quote-unquote legal tampering period officially opens on Monday. Until then, thanks for listening to this episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. Hoo day, and have a good one.